Everyone, welcome to our webinar. Today's topic is on timber salvage. So, as you all know, there's been a lot of, or as some of you know, there's been a lot of fires in the western part of Canada, specifically Alberta and British Columbia. Alberta's had, we'll get into the slides here in a bit, but Alberta's had over 1.7 million hectares burnt this year, which is very substantial. In today's webinar, you're going to be learning some stats on historical trends from like the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s to today, as that will really just outline how substantial this year's fire season has been. We'll have Victor, who's on here. He's going to be presenting some additional information on timber salvage, and then we'll go into some of the services that Fortech can help with for timber salvage and timber salvage utilization. So without further ado, we'll get started here. If you want to type in the chat your name and company that you're with, email address, and what you hope to get out of today, then you can be entered to win a 10% off of our Fortech store online. So Fortech, we're a forestry and environmental services company located in Western Canada, and we have a focus on quality, accuracy, and safety. So I started the company Fortech in 2016, and with the intent to be an industry leader in Western Canada. So here's a bit about myself. I am a registered professional forest technologist, RPFT in Alberta. I'm actually, it's not on this slide, but I'm an RFT, so registered forestry technician in British Columbia as well. 15 years experience in the forest industry. I'm president of Fortech, and some of my past roles has been project manager with TDS Forestry. I've worked with CCI Solutions and Nate Border Research, just coming out of school. So 2023 Alberta wildfire season. It's a cool picture. So here's some of the current statistics of Alberta and what's going on. So total hectares burnt is, pushing close to 1.8 million hectares. It's very substantial. 909 wildfires this year to date, and there's currently 133 active fires. This is as of July 24th. Just wanted to confirm a recording.
Yes, we are.
Thank you. So here's a current Alberta wildfire map. So as you can see, there's fires all across the province. Pretty much anywhere that there's forests, there's fires this year. As you can tell, sort of the north or central western part of the province has currently the most out of control fires. And you can tell that there's been a lot of fires down in the Edson, sort of Whitecourt to Edson areas and south. And you can see their footprints there, quite large. The mapped areas, they are all under control pretty much, except for that one there. But there's been a lot of area and hectares burnt in those parts of the province. So yeah, just on the side here, wildfire status. So out of control is red, being held is yellow, and under control is green, mutual aid is blue. So yeah, this is an app you can download on your phone, Alberta Wildfire, and it's good to see what's going on, especially if you work in the forest industry or in the outdoors. It's good to know when new fires start that could possibly threaten your operations. Alberta wildfire stats. So as of 2023, total area burned. This is by forest area. So some substantial ones there is High Level and Slave Lake, as well as Edson and Fort McMurray forest areas. So here's the breakdown of 2023 of what they've determined started the fires. So 478 by human, 335 by lightning, 94 under investigation. Total number of wildfires per decade. So yeah, this is a really cool chart to look at. I specifically asked that we put this in the slideshow. It's 1960s, just over, or 4,666 number of wildfires. Oh yes, these are number of wildfires up. Hectares is what is quite interesting to me, but so 2000s we had lots of fires, 2010s lots of fires, 1980s lots of fires, and the 2020s were only 3 years in and we've had 2000 already. So yeah, here's the total hectares burnt per decade. So as you can tell, 1980s was a huge fire decade. 7 million hectares, over 7 million hectares burnt. 2010s, we had 3 million hectares burnt. 2020s, 1.748 hectares burnt. So we're just, yeah, it just goes to show that, you know, in the 1980s they had lots of fires, and I'm sure some of you have been dealing with that in the forest industry. And you know, this year already we have 1.8 million hectares burnt. So his average fire size per decade. So the fire sizes are bigger since 2020, 846 hectares average size. I know there's been some really big ones in the hundreds of thousands of hectares. So yeah, I just wanted to ask questions to anyone on here. If you work in the forest industry, have you experienced any sort of fire salvage or timber utilization in your line of work? If so, feel free to raise your hand and we can call on you and unmute you, and you can or you can just unmute yourself and, you know, let us know some things that you've dealt with over the years in fire salvage and how it's affected your operations. I don't know if you have anything, Victor, over the years that you wanted to talk about and some of the programs you've dealt with, or how it's impacted, you know, annual allowable cuts and things like that.
I'm gonna say we've got a few people on here who probably dealt with it over the years. I know the salvages that I've worked with has been much smaller scale than what we're looking at this year, but it's been really interesting to watch the forest kind of regrow and redo its thing, and then having to manage through that as you work through the different timber types and existing cut blocks and all those kind of things, that all the legislative things that go with it as you go through. So it's been interesting for sure.
Yeah, my experience has primarily been on the layout and cut block side. So dealing with basically client directive of, you know, what's too burnt, what's acceptable, what we can take and what we can't take, and then sort of what they can get approved for salvage plans and stuff like that, and then just going with the specifications and flagging the boundaries, flagging the roads, and figuring out the best plan. Some operations I've seen able to take quite burnt wood, and some not as much. And I think a lot of times that depends on what they're utilizing the fiber for, whether it's saw log or pulp or OSB, for example. I don't know if anyone else on here has any comments about maybe what their end product is at the mill that they work at, and how well they can utilize burnt wood, for example. Or if you have any generic questions. If not, we'll carry on with the slideshow. All right, so now we're went over this year's statistics already on wildfires. Almost 1.8 million hectares burnt in Alberta. Now we're going to go into timber salvage post wildfire. So I'll hand it over to Victor.
Yeah, so I've been working in the forest industry since 07. So looking at almost 20 years now, I guess. Been with Vortex since 2020, so on my third year with these guys. Working with them, doing a lot of the data work at this point, and helping with project estimations, as well as a little bit of project managing in the past. Not so much currently, but just helping to do a lot of that. Brandon's kicking me off my slides. I am an RPFT in Alberta, so that gets me a lot of the good stuff here. That gets me into the legislation and all those kind of things. That I've done some planning, been with forest operations, been on the silviculture side. That's kind of my bread and butter is the silviculture, but definitely have spent time in operations and in planning as well. So.
All right.
So timber salvage is defined as the practice of logging trees in forest areas that have been damaged by natural disturbances. So we've got fires, obviously the main one that happens. There's also wind events that have happened. We've had breakage events, weather comes through, breaks tops off trees, those kind of things for sure. Results in salvage. We've got floods that can happen as well. Not as widespread maybe in Alberta as in other locations, but definitely flooding can be a result of a bunch of those kind of things too. Not sure about earthquakes here. Thinking about like Mount St. Helens down in the States. They did a bunch of timber salvage and regrowth through all of the timbered area that kind of blew off there. So those things do happen as well, probably less frequent, but definitely there. So yeah, wildfire, floods, severe winds, insects, and disease. Didn't bring those ones up in the past slide, but for sure mountain pine beetle causes salvage. Different diseases can run through and destroy your forest for sure as well. Usually impacts younger forests more than older forests, but definitely results in some issues that can result in salvage needing to be taken care of. So the intent of salvage is to recoup the economic value of the timber that would otherwise be lost. And usually with salvage, it doesn't result in 100% clear cut all the time. There is sometimes often debris that is left behind for ecological value on the flip side as well, just because we do try and mirror what naturally happens in the forest as best possible. So we do leave some material behind all the time. Even in what we consider clear cuts, there's still always debris left behind. So who is responsible? When we're talking about in Alberta, FMA holders, Forest Management Agreement area holders, have the primary responsibility for the planning and the reforestation following forest operations. So that it does include all salvage operations as well, if there's anything that's large enough scale that they deem as important. You've also got quota holders as a smaller disposition holder that could be responsible for that as well. And the government does allow for private, sorry, trying to get my wording right, for the public to go out and salvage off of those as well on specific areas where agreements are not being currently held. So if there's fire that maybe goes through on some private lands, or sorry, on some public land that is adjacent to private land that maybe FMA holders decide that they don't want to necessarily go after, or it's too small a scale. Sometimes they allow for private for the general public to go in and grab timber off of that for their own needs. Following natural disturbances. Sorry, when does timber salvage occur? Sorry, I'm just reading the general slide. Salvage typically occurs within 2 years of the actual disturbance. Because what we start to find is after 2 years, the damage to the stand starts to become too extensive that it just becomes doesn't become economical anymore to run it through and actually grab the value out of it. So it becomes the ecological value after that. And basically nature does its own thing and starts to do its own regrowth and decay on its own. And so it returns the forest back to its own state. So I guess if there's any questions out there, it'd be a good time to ask. I don't know if you guys want to throw some in the chat. Good spot for it, maybe.
Yeah, if not, we'll just carry on. I could take the next bit here. Oh, actually, you do this next section, Victor, and then I'll go after that.
Sure. So a FMA agreement, forest management agreement, is a 20-year term. It's renewed every 10 years. And basically what it is allows for companies to harvest on an area-based within Alberta, that is basically through the government to allow for them to harvest the timber and make sure that they're getting the economic value out of that. They also have a 200-year program that they have to manage as well, that basically says that they're going to be doing things properly over the next 200 years to make sure that the forest is growing properly and not just going in on a 20-year basis, taking all the trees off and then saying, oh, well, that's too bad, we're done. They have to look at it over a 200-year period. So how the agreement works is through a forest management agreement, a company is given certain rights, including the right to establish, grow, harvest, and remove crown timber in Alberta. So crown timber is basically anything that is located within what we call the green zone. The white zone is basically public lands, farmlands, those kind of locations there. Yeah. What does an FMA entail? The rights to an FMA are granted in exchange for various responsibilities such as forest management planning and creation and maintenance of a forest inventory within the boundary of the FMA, of the agreement area. So it allocates timber and provides rights of that holder to the crown timber and requires that that an approved forest management plan be in place before any timber can be harvested. And there is agreements that are put in place. It's called an annual operating plan that is done every year to allow them annual rights to be able to operate within that land. fire salvage, obviously, kind of looking at that, is to utilize as much of the fire-killed timber as possible within 2 years of the fire event, while maintaining environmental values. So that's the biggest thing that I think a lot of people don't always understand, is that we're not, companies aren't given kind of a green card, a blanket statement just to say go collect as many trees as you can. Still have to maintain the environmental values. So always looking at your water courses, your soils, all of those things still play into how we manage and can manage the forest, even through salvage events. So kind of the things that that are entailed in fire salvage planning is obviously the timber allocation, who's going to get it and when, operational planning, timber supply analysis, reforestation, utilization, timber dues and scaling, all play a part in that. Companies with a timber tenure in the burnt area have the first opportunity to obtain fire-killed timber. So in this case, a lot of the time it is the FMA holder, has the first right of refusal on a lot of that stuff, and are asked to salvage as much as they possibly can. And when they look at the areas, if they decide that if it's too much, then they have the opportunity to potentially ask some of their quota holders or adjacent companies to potentially share in that salvage opportunity to maintain the forest as best possible. So there's a notice of intent to salvage by companies where their fire salvage or where salvage needs are needed to take place. So it's basically a letter that it's a written notice with the intent to salvage, saying that basically lets the government of Alberta know that that company has the intent to go and grab as much timber as they can, that within their area that is obviously feasible to them. So it outlines the volume of salvage that they can potentially take, the stand types that will be salvaged, the applicable stands, tree utilization standards by forest management unit, and quadrant allowable production for the tenure. So those are things that must be included within that intent to ensure that everything is taken care of. And all of those numbers start to play into where the approvals start to go from that point on. So Alberta may issue competitive timber salvage permits for any areas that were not allocated. So that's where I was saying that the public may be able to have access to some of these areas to be able to go and collect their own firewood or collect their own fire kill for their own little projects. Maybe they've got something they've got in mind. I know there's a few people around Drayton Valley area who are doing that with the fires that were around here earlier this spring. Getting pretty creative with some of their little projects. Alberta may also restrict companies from harvesting green timber in any area where dead or damaged timber is sufficiently available. So that's where they can say, no, you have to go after the fire kill first, or the damaged timber first before you go after the green timber. And so that allows the forest to actually kind of sustain itself a little bit longer. So getting into the planning still, or continuing on in the planning, fire salvage plans required for fires of any size where more than one timber tenure holder in the forest management unit has provided notice of intent. Fires that affect more than 1,000 hectares of productive forest land base. So that's a lot of the fires right now. Well, at least in the area that I'm in. So I'm in the Drayton Valley area. So west of us had some very significant fires that ran west all the way south of Edson. So yeah, so large area was definitely impacted there. So there's multiple tenure holders within those areas that have been impacted, whether it's just the FMA agreement holders or quota holders within those agreement areas. So the government of Alberta may approve the inclusion of unburnt areas of green timber within the boundary of the fire salvage planning area where the volume of fire salvage is too low to be feasible for harvest. Wow, that was a mouthful. So what that's referring to is being able to grab some islands that are potentially within the burned boundary that make it so that operational planning is just a little bit easier, is really what that's referring to. So when we look at the timber supply, what that really becomes is how it impacts the future of the forest. So whenever we look at those numbers, it allows for the assessment of the impact that specific wildfires have on the resource and other values, on the timber resource and other values. So this information is used to determine if changes to the forest management plan are required. So depending on how large the fire is, obviously it plays an impact on what future harvest plans may look like, both within that agreement area, but also to those that are impacted by it. Annual cut variances. So if a wildfire burns through a forest management agreement area, there will be where a salvage logging plan goes into place, which displaces the original harvest plan. So in this case, in the Edson and Hinton and Drayton Valley areas, where the fires that I'm more locally familiar with, they would be asked by the government to target the burned areas and leave a lot of their current plans behind, so to speak. Not ignore them, but just put them on the back burner for a couple of years or for this year, so they can harvest as much of the fire kill as possible. So continuing with cut variances, there may be opportunities for surge cuts to be able to take some of the salvage. Obviously, it's related to how much mill capacity is available as well. If your mills can only accept so much, then sometimes that's all you can really take. But it does allow for the removal of as much as that fire kill as possible, so that it can be returned to a managed, so it can get put into a managed forest as quickly as possible. But what this does is every time there is a surge cut, there's a change in what your available cuts are for future years beyond that. So obviously, if you have a peak this year, then that means that over your next 20 years, you'll have a decrease in your cut to kind of balance it out. So if the fires are large enough, they can obviously cause future complications. Homogeneous forest is something that Alberta has been dealing with for a very, very long time. And one of the things that the public looks at is when we reforest cut blocks, they look at, okay, we're only putting one species back. But when you look at what was there originally, we are usually dealing with a much more homogeneous forest than what was there previously. Yes, we've got aspen and lodgepole pine and white spruce and black spruce But those are very specific to their own locations that they love to grow. And typically they'll grow back in the exact same locations. So traditionally when we put things back into a managed forest as a cut block, a lot of the time the aspen will grow where aspen grew previously, the pine will grow where it loved to grow before, same with the spruce. So it tends that we'll end up putting the same forest back as what was there previously in the prior to the cut. Oh, excuse me. So yeah, reforestation. Reforestation of salvaged fire kill timber is a fundamental requirement. Mandatory reforestation obviously applies to all salvage harvesting in Alberta, which means that we may have to do the site prep to it. We will have to replant because usually the seed, depending on the fire intensity, the seed value may not be there as well. Obviously, what was there prior to the fire obviously plays a huge impact as well. If it's all been beetle kill and the trees have been standing there for 10 years, the seed is not there from that. So obviously there'll have to be some planting that goes in after that. And so making sure that the seed source is still from the same general location. And that's part of the reason why the seed bank in Alberta for sure needs to have so many number of years of seed available for things just like this. And so there may be a surge of cone collection over the next few years to be able to kind of get that seed inventory back to where it needs to be. So harvest area or cut blocks that have met the reforestation standards or were being treated to meet those standards and end up being burnt by a wildfire, they're eligible for reforestation funding through FRIA, so the Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta. They have programs in place that all forest management companies put funds into as part of, I believe it's part of their timber dues. A portion of that goes to FRIA to kind of help with some of these programs. And so that's dealing with cut blocks that basically have not met, that have not met their obligations and are, so to speak, free growing. So they are still part of the liability for harvest companies. I think that's the next slide, actually. I think I jumped ahead on myself. Oh, no, questions. Has your timber supply area been impacted by wildfires either this year or in the past? What are some challenges that you will have to navigate through, or that you may have to navigate through?
I guess I got one, or unless someone else does, but we're managing some quota for a client of ours, and their entire quota area has been logged or burnt completely. So their 20-year sequence has been completely burnt. So we have already went and laid out the sequenced wood, and then we've actually requested to get additional volume to log in the area on their behalf. Luckily that client can take burnt wood, and they can, as long as it's not like too burnt, then they can take it. So we've been able to utilize most of the sequence with our layout. So yeah, that's something that Vortex currently dealing with, and then we do have a few other clients that we're dealing with similar situations. Anyone else have anything?
Can't hear you, Grant. I don't know if you just want to type your question, maybe.
I'm trying to unmute him, but oh, there it might work.
Oh, you know what? There we go.
Oh, can hear you now.
Yeah,
There's-
it was on the cord. It's Grant Hutmeyer calling from West Fraser and Hinton. So right now we're kind of going out to burned areas and assessing salvageability. One issue and challenge we're going through is just what can be salvaged, what's too burned. Using different mapping tools, and then going to the field and trying to assess what can be salvaged and what can't be. We haven't really had to deal with this here before, so it's kind of a learning curve for everyone. But ironically, I'm actually pre-blocking some stuff for Fortec right now, so see what your expertise can show me about the topic on that, and kind of go from there.
I think we've probably done maybe, I would say at least 15 salvage plans over since Vortex started. So we've
That's
had
good.
different specs from different clients for sure. Some
Yeah.
will push to try to, take what they can, and some won't. And a lot of times it just depends what they're using it for. With saw log, I mean, as long as it's not burnt like into the tree too bad or anything, then can usually take it. But if you're like pulp, for example, is one where a lot of people have challenge with utilizing.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah. But yeah, I think in the past I've seen a lot of clients like once they have a project and they kind of run it through the mill, then they get a feel for what they can and can't utilize.
You're right. Well, and it looks so different too when you first go out there to assess, and then you lay it out. And by the time they actually get there, it might be a lot more checking. The wood's deteriorated in that time. Like what it looks like then is also different. So it's like time is of the essence, and being flexible and adaptable to what is out there. But
Yeah,
it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I know a lot of companies that don't like to utilize it more than say than the following winter. Like after that,
Yeah.
if you get rough, say if you were to harvest the next winter, that would be, I think, pretty challenging depending on the intensity of the fire. If it just was a small ground fire burnt under the canopy, then that's different. But I think in these bigger fires, it's definitely you want to get after it as quickly as you can for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
We have another question here. Looks like they direct messaged me. Is there any way any way that you can utilize helicopters with cameras to survey massive areas of burn to figure out the best areas to target for layout? Interesting question. Yeah, you can for sure. I think most fire salvage plans that I've seen have been kind of a combination of aerial and ground surveys. So obviously if your blocks are planned and you have a certain area and you're going to be walking it anyway, then you might as well just walk through and kind of figure it out on the ground. But definitely when there's large areas burnt, we've seen there'd be flights where you just fly the area and sort of aerial survey it first and then ground survey it after. But maybe drones could be utilized too, I'm not sure, but yeah, I think once you can kind of get an understanding of what from the air looks like from the ground, then I think you're good. But you got to kind of get that dialed in. Might take a while to fly and figure out. If you don't have experience doing it and you go and fly it, you might think it's certain quality, and then you get on the ground and look at it, it might be different. So that's always something to keep in mind. But yeah, I would say that definitely most companies, I think, fly their areas and check them out, especially right after the fire. Kind of just get a general overview of what's going on out there. I don't know if anyone else had anything on that. So yeah, that's kind of all I got for that one then. So we'll carry on. So I can take it from here, Victor, if you want. It's probably sick of talking. So FRIA, what is FRIA? So FRIA is the Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta. So it provides grant funding for reforestation, and it's linked to the government of Alberta. So FRIA was created to oversee the Forest Resource Improvement Program funds. So the FRIP funds. FRIA offers funding through many programs, each designed to serve a different need. So yeah, if you go on the FRIA website, you can see all the different programs that they have listed there. And this one specifically falls under like a wildfire program. I think we have an upcoming slide. Yeah, right here. FRIA's WRP program, so Wildfire Reclamation Program, helps to reestablish forest cover damaged or destroyed by wildfire. Program supports companies through the duration of reforestation activity, which in Alberta is typically 14 years. WRP program eligible activities. So eligible activities include surveys, site preparation, planting, seeding, administrative costs, and others. So WRP strives to overcome the costly and negative impacts of wildfire. So yeah, from my understanding with FRIA, with the WRP program, you basically submit your proposal to them, and typically things that would be included is what's listed there. So you might have some costs associated with flying the area or surveying the area to figure out how damaged it is. Figuring out site preparation planning, planting or seeding, administrative costs. So yeah, basically if a cut block burns, so if say a mill has a FMA, they go and log blocks and then they replant them. They're basically liable for that for 14 years after they plant. So till they pass their performance surveys. So if that cut block burns, technically they're still liable. So a good way for the mill to make sure that they don't have to, spend a ton of money out of their own pocket, which every mill pays into FRIA, but basically you can write a proposal to FRIA and request that, hey, we're going to plan to plant these blocks, or hey, we lost a large area of forest that we don't think is actually going to grow back. So they might decide to put a proposal out to tree plant, just the burnt area across the landscape if they feel that it's burnt too hard and there's maybe it's a spruce stand and the seed's burnt and it's not going to really grow back properly, then that affects their future wood supply, right? So I think it's a really good program that has a lot of opportunity for companies to request additional funding to help out post wildfire. And we write those proposals as well. We wrote quite a few, so that's one of our services that we'll get into. Qualifying for FRIA funding. So to apply, you must qualify for funding under FRIA's Wildfire Reclamation Program. Each company must agree to fulfill their reforestation obligations to the Crown, including treatments required to meet the current regeneration performance standards. Timber utilization standards. Destroyed stands and green stands should be left unharvested. I think that might be green stands. I think in general green stands, but there may be green islands and patches that are not required for structure retention that can be harvested due to high blowdown risk. Timber utilization stands. Burned or damaged stands should be harvested with 1511 utilization standards. However, other standards may be approved on a case-by-case basis. So I think the one we just put in, Victor, what was it? It was a 1913?
Yeah, I believe it was a 1913 was the target spec. So obviously if they can get a little bit better, then that's great for them. But that's kind of where the timber was, just how badly damaged it was saying where it was likely to be harvested at.
Yeah, so I think you just submit that in your salvage plan, that document you went over earlier. notice of intent to salvage that one. Timber utilization. Trees are considered green if they are less than 0.9 meters of char exists when measuring from the ground. So that's taken right out of a document that we took most of this information out of. I can't remember the name of it. Do you remember the name, Victor?
I should, considering I've looked at it so many times, but unfortunately I don't.
Yeah, I should remember the name, but it's basically a document that outlines like fire salvage in Alberta, the generic one. And 0.3 stump allowance plus 0.6 meter bucking allowance. Timber utilization trees. So charred wood on green trees, including charred cat faces, knots, and other defects, can be bucked out. Trees are considered fire damage when the char is greater than 0.9 meters or greater when measured from the ground. Timber utilization, so top size, normal top size for green tops, burn tops may be bucked back to a char-free point. Piece size rules are waived for burnt stands. I think we already touched on a few things about fire salvage in the last question period. Did anyone else have any questions, I guess, so far? I'll move on to the next slide. Timber dues and scaling. Fire killed timber is considered dead wood, and the applicable dead timber due rates apply. Residual areas of green timber that show evidence of blowdown can be treated as endangered timber for dues purposes. Yeah, so basically the mills get cheaper dues when harvesting salvage wood, which makes sense because they're not getting, you know, the traditional good green tree that they normally would prefer. Timber dues and scaling. Fire killed timber from the same fire and delivered to a specific mill may be grouped into a single scaling population where the log hull profile is unsorted and the species and harvested utilization standards are the same. So logs must be sorted into separate scaling populations for certain uses. Each population must be segregated and measured separately. Segregated and measured separately. So for scaling, loads will be recorded by harvest areas, so by cut block, and burned and green harvest areas are to be numbered separately. Separate scaling populations are necessary when sorting logs for specific reasons. Building logs versus posts and poles, for example. Each population must be segregated and measured separately. That photo is really good one. You can sort of see the different areas. It's like the green, super burnt, less burnt. It's really interesting, a really good example of how you might have multiple, either green or burnt or different type of wood profile in blocks. This photo here on the right, one of our employees actually just took a week ago when doing some fire salvage layout. That was what they were having to deal with to walk through to get to their block. And of course, after the fire, they had a lot of rain, so you can see the water pooled there. So basically going through blowdown and water to get to the block and dealing with burnt wood all day. It's actually quite dangerous. So when we do fire salvage plans, we're always quite strict on our wind thresholds, and there's always the risk that standing dead trees can come down. They basically can just fall over with the mildest wind or even no wind. So something definitely to be aware of when doing fire salvage plans. Okay, so debris and chip disposal and pile retention activity follows the standards outlined in the directive on debris management standards for the timber harvesting operations and the forest and prairie protection regulations. Companies must identify how debris and chips will be disposed of in the fire salvage plan and the AOP. So yeah, having burnt brush piles for post fire salvage operations, it can be very challenging to get burnt logs to burn. So that's something to consider when if you're working a mill or whatever and you're trying to figure out how to get the piles and debris dealt with after. It can be quite challenging. Any questions on that section? All right, so now we'll go into Vortex services. So these are current services that we have related to fire. So wildfire fighting, currently Vortex has a type 3 crew in British Columbia doing firefighting. Salvage planning and burn severity assessments, we've done lots of that. We have multiple forestry technicians or foresters that work for us that have experience with that. Cut block layout, that's probably one of our most core services. Logging supervision, so quite often we send employees out to supervise logging, or we have a short list of logging contractors that we work with on specific smaller projects. Tree planting and aerial seeding, so yeah, we do tree planting more so on a specialized basis. Like the most trees we ever planted in a year was just over 1 million. So, but definitely smaller scale planting and aerial seeding is something that we're looking at. We have a couple of clients that we're working with to try to figure out how to seed from helicopter or airplane. So we can cover a lot more area. There's 1.8 million hectares burnt this year. There's going to be a huge need for reforestation, probably more than most tree planting companies could handle. So looking at alternative things like aerial seeding is not a bad thing to consider. Cone collection, yeah, so we do cone collections. We've done probably 5 or 6 of them, and we also have a sister company, Gemini Heli, that we could utilize for aerial cone collection. Fire smart projects, we've done about 4 or 5 fire smart projects over the years, typically just around communities, spacing and whatnot of trees. Reclamation, we have a partnership with a small construction company that we have access to 3 dozers and 3 excavators, so we can potentially help with recontouring and reclaiming cat guards and things like that. Generation surveys, our forestry technicians can do a lot of that work, and then we have free proposals as well, as I mentioned earlier.
Brandon, you have a question. Does Vortec have an instruction manual for their staff on how to determine burn utilization and things to look for, like leopard print trees, etc.?
I don't think we have a formal manual. From some projects we've done in the past, we had in our startup meeting clearly identified what that client wanted. So that's something that I think we would probably build on a client basis. I think the way we did it in the past was we went a burn severity 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we had that for every block or parts of blocks. So some blocks might have like a burn severity 1 on a certain side and a 4 in the other, for example. And then we just had a code. So we just said burn severity 1 means this, burn severity 2 means, so burn severity 1 might be like green, for example, and then 2 might be like bark burnt, low intensity ground fire or something, and then 3 would be like the whole tree kind of burnt but still salvageable, and 4 would be like really burnt and not really salvageable, for example. So we could probably on a specific project set up coding for that and train all our staff on it and make sure that we're on the same page. If that answered your question. Yes. Okay, awesome. So yeah, we're just going to quickly breeze through these services that I already mentioned. So earlier this year, Fortech secured a 3-year contract with the BC Wildfire Service to supply wildland firefighters to support the wildfire suppression efforts in British Columbia. So currently, if you're on here and you're interested in working with us, we're looking to hire danger tree assessors, fallers, and firefighters. And our main area is Prince George for that work. Salvage planning, so provide timely and effective fire salvage planning and operations. We can help you utilize as much fire killed timber as possible within 2 years of the fire event while maintaining environmental values. Burn severity assessments. So burn severity is measured on a continuous scale by performing aerial or ground surveys or by evaluating changes in satellite imagery. Our experts then create discrete classes of severity. So that's sort of what I just mentioned. Cut block layout. Layout is the process of verifying and delineating the areas to be harvested by the forest company. As part of the process, watercourses, wildlife species, and features, target tree species, and many other factors are considered when out in the field. So Fortech is highly experienced in managing, supervising, and coordinating activities of logging operations. Tree planting and aerial seeding. So yeah, we have a partnership now with Gemini Heli. And one thing that we're working on with them is trying to figure out the aerial seeding aspect that I mentioned. We're going to hopefully be doing some test runs here this fall. And then, yeah, we do tree planting as well, but like I said, more to smaller specialized scale, but we can coordinate and consult and plan for projects as well, like do tree orders and things like that. Tree plant quality checks, things like that. Cone collection. So yeah, we've been doing cone collections over the past few years, and now we have the option to do helicopter cone collection as well. Fire Smart, as I mentioned, we've done a fair bit of Fire Smart projects over the years. This photo on the right is must be interim. Partway through the project, we'd remove some of the trees, and this before we pruned and everything. Victor might know more about that one.
Brandon, sorry, we have another question from Dell. How do you plan your post-fire actions?
You plan your post-fire actions. Typically, we would have a conversation with our client and see what their goals are, and then we would build a plan and work towards achieving those goals. So, for example, I mentioned our one client had their entire quota burnt, so we were able to go in and plan. We asked them their goals, and their goals was to harvest as much as they could of the burnt forest, up to 150,000 meters cubed for this winter. So they only had, I think, 10,000 meters cubed. I'm just throwing a random number out there, but it was something like that available in their sequence. And we were able to basically go out, speak with the government, submit the intention to salvage. And then from there, we were able to have further conversations with the FMA holder to see if there's any additional wood that we could harvest. And now we're going through the process of trying to basically maximize what they can take for timber. And then we're going to be doing some other stuff like assessing what cut blocks that they've already replanted have been burnt and figuring out a plan for tree planting them or writing free proposals to get money for that. So yeah, I guess how do we plan post-fire actions is basically we identify what the goals are of our client or what our goals are, and then we collaborate is pretty much the next step. There's a lot of collaboration on these projects, with government, with other companies. I was on a meeting the other day and I think there was 4 or 5 different forestry companies on there, all collaborating and discussing how they were going to deal with this. So, a lot of times these are catastrophic events that take a lot of community involvement, industry involvement, business to business collaboration in order to see success on them. Hopefully that answers your question. Reclamation. So yeah, we have extensive experience with managing reclamation projects from start to finish. Through some of our joint partnerships, we're able to, well, specifically our one joint partnership, we're able to provide equipment and manpower necessary to facilitate any reclamation projects that you might need done. Next question I got here is, do we consider natural regeneration? The answer is yes, definitely. So when you're going out and checking the area, that's probably going to be one of the main things you're looking for is how bad it burnt, what cone seed is available on the ground from the fires, or obviously pine stands grow back after fire a lot better than say spruce. So I was part of some FRIA work up in Manning and High Level area a few years back. And when we were doing our assessments out there, we did aerial assessments first to see what areas we, based off of forest type or AVI, that we figured would have more challenge coming back, like growing back. And then we flew them all the next spring post fire, and we actually walked around, landed with a helicopter, walked around, looked and seen which areas were actually having natural regen and which weren't. And then we were able to map those areas out from the air and from the ground, and put the planting and efforts were basically where we had the least natural regen. So you definitely want to consider natural regen. Anytime that you can have that is awesome, because that saves a lot of money for everybody. But it's not always going to happen. So hopefully that answered your question. Regeneration surveys. So yeah, we do regen surveys, performance surveys, any sort of surveys that need done. So like if you have cut blocks that were burnt, for example, in the fire, we could go out and assess the burn of the cut blocks and to build a planting prescription, or basically a regen prescription. And then I mentioned FRIA proposals. So we have at least 2 staff members that have quite a bit of experience with writing FRIA proposals. I answered a few questions there. If there's any more, feel free to type in the chat or unmute yourself. So yeah, we're going to mention just a few jobs that we're hiring for. So for our type 3 wildfire contract, we're looking for firefighters, danger tree assessors, and fallers. We're looking for forestry technicians and foresters to complete cut block layout, tree measurements, and other various technical forestry work. If you're interested in applying, email your resume to careers@fortech.ca. And then, yeah, we're getting close to wrapping up here. So we have Nicole on the meeting here. She's in business development with her company. Her contact info is there. So if you're interested in hiring us to do a job for you, can reach out to her, or you can reach out to me. My name's on there, or Cody. And then if you're interested in applying, especially for fire, but applying for anything, you can contact Layla. She's our human resources manager as well as our fire contract manager. I think that's our last slide. Just wanted to thank everyone for attending today. If you have any final questions, feel free to type in the chat. This will be posted to our YouTube channel. It's just Fortech on YouTube. And you can use this as continuing competency hours. I think we have over 18 videos now that we've done on industry talks with Fortech or online webinars. And if you need CC hours, we've been approved by AFMP to utilize these webinars for your CC hours. So you can feel free to even just go through our YouTube channel and watch some of the past videos that we've done and get those hours. So if there's no more questions, then we'll close off the meeting. I wanted to thank Victor for being on here today and going through those slides and bringing the knowledge that he has. And we had some really good conversations with some industry experts in that joined our webinar today too. So it's great to have you all.